everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Christine Santos. I'm a video journalist, media educator, and founder of Epic Generation. We are a proud Media Literacy Week collaborator, and so we bring you this Break the Fake workshop, how to tell what's true online. Whether you're looking at a website, a photo or video, or a news story, what really matters is whether or not the people who originally created it are trustworthy. You can't always confirm that something is false, but if the source isn't reliable, then you have no reason to believe it. This is the only time when it matters what order you do the steps in. Reliable sources do sometimes share things that turn out not to be true, and unreliable sources sometimes share things that are true. That's why you shouldn't bother verifying a source until you know for sure it's where the information originally came from. And when you do, you need to ask three questions. First, does this source really exist? We saw earlier how easy it is to make fake pictures online, and it's just as easy to make a fake website or social media profile. Second, are they who they say they are? It's also easy to impersonate people online and create imposter sites or social network accounts. And finally, are they reliable? Anybody can claim to be an expert online, so you need to make sure that there are good reasons to think that someone is a reliable source. Now, these days, it's easy to make websites that look just as slick and professional as anything that's out there. In fact, some trustworthy sources may look less professional than fake sites because they haven't put time or money into updating their website. People who spread misinformation on purpose often invent local newspapers or TV news stations. This kind of source seems trustworthy, but most of us aren't likely to have heard of a paper or TV station in a different city or country. Here are two websites that claim to be from Sherbrooke, Quebec, the Times and the Record. Which one do you think is real? Both of them have an About Us or Contact Us page with a street and email address and the names of people who work there. But then all of that is easy to fake. Instead, let's go to Wikipedia and see if there's an article there about the Sherbrooke Record. Okay, so Sherbrooke Record, Wikipedia. Let's see. From the Wikipedia article, we can see that the record has been around for more than a century, and there's no reason to think it isn't a reliable source. Now, how about the Times? There isn't an article about it in the Wikipedia, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not real. Wikipedia is written by volunteers, so a lot of things don't have entries. Instead, we can do a search on Google. The only results we can find are the website itself, its Twitter account, and articles pointing out that it's a fake. So it's easy to pretend to be someone else online. Once you know that the source really exists, then you need to find out if what you're looking at really came from them. Here's an example. Did the Toronto police really put out a warning about a man in a Spider-Man costume webbing streetcar lines? Some social networks like Twitter and Instagram verify users by putting a blue check mark next to their name. This doesn't mean they're necessarily a reliable source, but it does mean that they are who they say they are. In this case, it means that this is a real Toronto police account, which means the story is true. It's a bit harder to make sure you're on the right website. People have made fake versions of real news websites like The Guardian and the CBC that look almost exactly like the real thing. But there are things that are harder to fake. A web address by itself won't tell you if a site is reliable, for instance. Sites with .org addresses aren't necessarily more trustworthy, but the web address can tell you if you're on the organization's real website. If you're satisfied that a source is real and is who they say they are, then you have to find out whether they're trustworthy. For sources of general information like newspapers, That means asking if they have a process for making sure they're giving you good information and a good track record of doing it. This becomes important when you're looking at sources that aren't fake, but that may give you only a part of the story or may not have high standards in making sure that what they post is accurate. Unreliable sources sometimes do share things that are true, and even reliable sources can make mistakes, like this one. In general, though, if you see a story from a source you know is reliable, you can assume it's probably true. So this example here, like the Wall Street Journal, it is reliable, but then there is a typo error on this one, right? So that can happen. Now let's look at another pair of newspapers, the Washington Times and the Washington Post. They're both real newspapers and neither one is entirely unreliable, but one is more reliable than the other. There are signs you can look for to decide how reliable a news source is. How often do they make mistakes? If they do make mistakes, do they admit them and publish corrections? Are they willing to publish things that their owners or their readers wouldn't agree with? If we look up the Washington Post on Wikipedia, we see it's been around since 1877 and has won 47 Pulitzer Prizes for journalism. It's not perfect. They've published a few stories that turned out to be inaccurate, which they retracted and corrected publicly. But overall, it has a good track record. The Washington Times has also been around for a while, since 1982, but their track record isn't as good. Most of the Wikipedia article is about times they've spread misinformation about everything from the ozone layer to secondhand smoke. That doesn't mean the Times is an entirely unreliable source or that the Post never makes mistakes, but it does mean that most of the time you'll do a lot better trusting the Post. For more specialized sources, you want to ask whether they're experts or authorities on that topic. Being an expert is more than just being a doctor, a scientist, or a professor. Make sure they are an expert in the right field. For instance, a cardiologist would be an expert in treating your heart, but not on vaccines. Now, some sources, like certain professional groups or government agencies, are recognized authorities on particular topics. What they say carries more weight than any single expert in the field, and a lot more than a person or group who isn't an authority. So, how do you know who's an authority? Remember, anyone can call themselves a university. See this example here, for instance, it's not an accredited academic institution and does not offer certifications or diplomas. Or an institute on the internet, Institute for Functional Medicine, but then it had falsely advanced claims. Now, this news story on how to get cheaper flights is based on a survey by an organization called Skyscanner. The advice in it, including the tip to book travel, to book through a travel website instead of directly from an airline, comes from this guy named Alex Astafiev, one of their travel industry experts, quote unquote. A search for Skyscanner shows us that they are a travel website. A search for Asenyev's name shows he's actually their product manager. Remember that a LinkedIn page, like any other social network account, is easy to fake. So you'll want to at least want to get one more piece of evidence. Now we know that Skyscanner is not an authority and Astafiev is not an expert. Give it a try. Now take a look at two similar looking groups, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians. They both claim to represent American pediatricians. So which one are we more likely to trust? The AAP.org or acponline.org? Look at their websites and see which one do you think you would likely trust more than the other. So they both claim to represent American pediatricians and both have professional looking websites that provide lots of general information. But if we do a search for the AAP, and scroll past the results for their own website, we can see they have 64,000 doctors as members. Now, a search for the ACP shows they have just 500 members and a much weaker claim to be an authority on children's health. Looking more closely shows us the ACP is not just unreliable because it's not an authority like Skyscanner, it also has a strong bias. The whole reason its members split from AAP was because they were opposed to letting gay and lesbian parents adopt children. It's important, though, not to mix up authority and bias. Someone who is actually an expert on something will probably have stronger opinions about it than someone who isn't, but they'll be better informed opinions too. The difference is that AAP's positions on everything from car seats to when the school day should start are based on the expertise of their members. The ACPs are based on their beliefs about sexuality. Now, our last step, check other sources.